Well, Pete, it's fallen victim to the supply chain crisis, which is sweeping through the entire economy right now.
There is a bucket sitting in millions of American kitchens right now, red and white, familiar. The Colonel is smiling on the side of it, but the man behind that smile spent his final years furious at what KFC had become. He called the gravy wallpaper paste and the crispy recipe a fried dough ball stuck on chicken. They kept his face, ignored his warning, and hoped customers would too. Now the people who loved KFC the longest are walking away. Today, we are breaking down exactly why. 15. The man who knew. Let's start at the very beginning, because the beginning of this story is also the warning nobody listened to. Colonel Harlan Sanders was not a marketing creation. He was a real man obsessed for decades with one thing: perfect fried chicken. He controlled oil temperature down to the degree, pressure inside the cooker, and the exact blend of 11 herbs and spices so carefully that he mixed it himself and refused to write it all in one place. He cared about every detail, from biscuits to gravy to sides, with a level of obsession that came from treating food as something that had to be done right. He sold the company in 1964 for $2 million and almost immediately began watching it change. The pressure cooking method he perfected was altered. The gravy he developed was replaced with something he publicly called wallpaper paste. The chicken, in his words, became a fried dough ball. And he did not keep these opinions private. He said them openly, to reporters, in public, on record. So the question becomes, what does it mean when the founder is telling you the product is no longer what he created? Because the answer from the corporation was not silence. It was a continuation. They kept his face on the bucket. Think about that. The man who created the recipe is telling you it has been degraded, and the company responds by using his image to sell it anyway. So what matters more in that moment, the warning or the branding? That is where the real tension begins. Seniors who remember KFC when Sanders was still alive, still visiting locations and still openly critical, remember a different standard entirely. Back then, the obsession was the chicken. Today, the obsession is something else, and that leaves one final question hanging over the bucket he still smiles on. If the creator said it changed, and the brand never denied it, what exactly are you eating now? 14. The parent company. You cannot understand KFC without understanding who actually owns it. KFC is owned by a corporation called Yum! Brands. That exclamation point is real, and it tells you a great deal about the personality of the company. Yum! Brands is one of the largest fast food corporations on Earth. They operate over 55,000 locations across 155 countries. They are enormous, they are powerful, and they own a very specific collection of brands. KFC, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and the Habit Burger Grill. Now here is why that matters. On our previous deep dive into the worst fast food chains in America, Taco Bell took the #1 spot, the absolute bottom of the list. The chain with the most documented failures across food safety, ingredient quality, and worker treatment. And Taco Bell is owned by the exact same corporation that owns KFC. This is not a coincidence of corporate structure. This is a window into a management philosophy. When the same parent company produces two chains that consistently land at the bottom of quality and safety rankings, you are not looking at isolated problems at individual locations. You are looking at a systemic approach to running a food business. Yum! Brands operate on what the industry calls an asset-light model. That phrase sounds clean and efficient. What it actually means is that Yum! Brands do not want to own physical restaurants. They want to collect franchise fees and royalties from the people who do own them, while pushing the operational costs, the staffing decisions, the equipment maintenance, and the food sourcing choices down to the franchisee level. The result of this model is a corporation that collects enormous profits while maintaining a very convenient distance from the problems happening inside the actual kitchens. When the ice machine in Georgia is growing black slime, Yum! Brands are not responsible. When the chicken in Nevada is being held at dangerous temperatures, Yum! Brands are not responsible. When the health inspector in Ontario shuts the doors on New Year's Eve, Yum! Brands issue a statement and points at the franchisee. The profits flow up. The accountability flows down. Seniors who have been eating at KFC for 40 or 50 years are not eating the same brand. They are eating the franchise of a brand, managed by a parent corporation that has already proven with its other flagship chain exactly where food quality sits on the priority list. If that makes your blood boil, hit the like button right now. Because the more people who see this, the harder it becomes for corporations like Yum! Brands to keep hiding behind their franchisees while the profits pile up at the top. And if you are watching this and you have never subscribed to this channel, now is the time. Every single week we pull back the curtain on exactly this kind of corporate sleight of hand, the kind that costs you money, costs you your health, and counts on you never looking closely enough to notice. Hit subscribe so you never miss an investigation and drop in the comments below. Did you know that Taco Bell and KFC were owned by the same company? Because most people do not. And that is exactly how Yum! Brands prefer it. 13. The Shanghai Scandal. In 2014, an investigative television crew in Shanghai exposed a KFC supplier on hidden camera. Workers were filmed picking chicken off filthy factory floors, mixing spoiled and green-tinged meat into fresh batches, and relabeling expired product so it could be sold as new. This was not a minor vendor but a major processor in KFC's supply chain. When the footage aired, Chinese authorities shut the plant down and revoked its license. KFC quickly issued statements, cut ties with the supplier, and promised stronger oversight. But the underlying supply chain model did not change. The system still relied on low bids, high volume, and limited direct control across global suppliers. That pressure inevitably encourages cost-cutting and corner-cutting at the operational level. The Shanghai scandal was treated as an isolated incident rather than a structural failure. One supplier was removed, but the model stayed intact. For seniors who have seen these cycles before, the real question is not whether it happened once, but what in the system makes you confident it will not happen again. 12. The Ontario shutdown. Some of the KFC failures being discussed by seniors who are done with the chain are not from years ago. They are recent. On the last day of 2025, a KFC location in St. Catharines, Ontario, was shut down by the regional health department for being maintained in an unsanitary condition. The closure happened on New Year's Eve, while families were preparing their final meals of the year. So the question becomes simple. How does a major global brand end up in that position in a city of over 100,000 people? This was not a remote or forgotten location. It was a fully staffed, franchised store operating under the KFC name, with the Colonel's face on every bucket leaving the building. And yet it was deemed unfit to remain open. That is the pattern that repeats. A location opens under a global brand. Standards are expected. A problem surfaces. An inspection follows. A shutdown occurs. A statement is issued. And the system continues unchanged somewhere else. Because if the issue were truly isolated, it would not keep appearing across different places and different chains in the same region. In fact, the same area has seen other fast food closures for similar sanitation concerns, raising a larger question. Is this about individual stores or about how the system is managed at scale? And that is where the real concern begins. Because if a brand can be shut down for basic hygiene failures at the end of 1 year, in a modern, well-monitored city, then the question is not what happened once. It is what keeps making it possible again and again. 11. The recipe. Myth. For generations, the 11 herbs and spices were the myth at the center of KFC, a secret recipe. Vault stories. Only a few people know the full formula. It was powerful marketing, and originally tied to a man who actually mixed it himself. In 2016, a reported version of the recipe surfaced in a newspaper investigation, and what appeared was far more ordinary than the myth suggested. Common spices like salt, pepper, paprika, garlic, and mustard powder. But the real story is not what is in the recipe. It is what the recipe is applied to. Because when Colonel Sanders created it, he worked with fresh chickens from local farms, cooked in small batches with carefully controlled pressure and timing. The flavor was shaped by both seasoning and sourcing. So what happens when that same idea is scaled into an industrial system? The chicken changes. Today, it comes from factory farming systems, processed at high-volume facilities, frozen, transported across long supply chains, and cooked for speed and consistency rather than craft. So the question becomes, if the seasoning is similar, why does the result feel different? That is where the loop reveals itself. The brand maintains the myth of the original recipe. The recipe remains consistent, but the base ingredient has changed so significantly that the outcome no longer matches the memory. Which raises a final question. When people say it used to taste different, are they being nostalgic? Or are they describing what happens when only part of a system stays the same? 10. The antibiotic problem. When we talk about factory-farmed chicken, the antibiotic question becomes unavoidable, especially for seniors. Antibiotic resistance is a major public health concern. In industrial farming, antibiotics are often used not just to treat illness but to prevent disease in crowded conditions, and sometimes to promote faster growth. Over time, this can contribute to bacteria developing resistance to those drugs, which can then spread beyond farms and affect humans. For older adults, especially those with weaker immune systems or existing health conditions, antibiotic-resistant infections can become serious. So the question becomes, what standards do major chains actually follow? KFC does not maintain a "no antibiotics ever" policy. Instead, it uses a weaker standard that allows certain antibiotics not classified as critical to human medicine, a distinction that still leaves room within industrial farming practices. This sits in contrast with brands that once set stronger commitments. Chick-fil-A previously maintained a "no antibiotics ever" standard, but moved away from it in 2024, citing supply chain limitations. Which raises a broader question. If even the strictest commitments proved difficult to sustain, what does that imply about chains that never adopted them in the first place? For seniors paying close attention to health, medication interactions, and long-term well-being, this is not abstract. It connects directly to what they choose to eat. And that leaves one final question. When the standards are unclear, how do you know what you are really consuming? 9. Paying more for less. Chicken shrinkflation is one of the most subtle forms of corporate change. It happens when a product quietly gets smaller while the price stays the same or increases. Because packaging often remains familiar, most customers do not notice it until the comparison becomes obvious. KFC has been repeatedly associated with this pattern over time. Family buckets that once held more pieces now often contain fewer. Side portions have gradually reduced in size. Biscuits that were once a larger part of the meal have become smaller, while prices continue to rise. Across reviews and comparisons, customers have documented this shift by comparing older orders with current ones. So the question becomes, if the price is rising and the portions are shrinking, what exactly is being paid for? A family meal that cost significantly less a few years ago now costs more, while containing less food and showing no clear improvement in quality based on consistent customer and inspection reports. For seniors on fixed incomes, this is not a minor change. It is a direct financial impact, where purchasing power does not match rising menu prices. Which leads to the final tension. If customers are paying more for less and the experience is not improving, what is driving the difference? And at that point, the only thing that has clearly increased is the gap between expectation and reality. 8. What inspectors keep finding. We have already talked about the New Year's Eve shutdown in Ontario, but that closure is not an isolated event. It sits within a wider, documented pattern of kitchen conditions at KFC locations that raises broader questions about food safety. Fast food chains are built on a promise of consistency. A KFC in one country is supposed to feel the same as a KFC in another. Same recipe, same standards, same experience. But inspection records tell a more complicated story. Across different states and provinces, KFC locations have been cited for recurring issues such as improper food storage temperatures, weak hand-washing practices, pest evidence, cross-contamination risks, and equipment maintenance failures. These are not complex problems, they are basic food safety standards. So what does it mean when the same categories of violations appear across different locations, operated by different franchisees in different regions? It suggests the issue is not isolated to one store. It suggests a system-level gap in how standards are enforced. Because under the franchise model used by Yum! Brands, individual operators have significant control over day-to-day operations. When a location fails an inspection, responsibility is placed on that franchisee. But when similar failures appear repeatedly across multiple locations, the question shifts. How consistent is the oversight behind them? Seniors who have relied on the idea of uniformity for decades are often trusting not just a brand, but a promise of standardization. And that is where the real tension lies, between the story of consistency and the uneven reality inside individual kitchens. 7. The people cooking your food. The conversation about fast food quality cannot be separated from the conversation about how fast food workers are treated. These are not parallel issues. They are the same issue. When workers are paid poverty wages, given unpredictable schedules, denied benefits, and treated as interchangeable parts in a machine rather than human beings with dignity and expertise, the quality of the product they produce reflects that treatment. Not because workers who are treated badly intentionally produce bad food, but because the conditions that produce that treatment also produce high turnover, inadequate training, low morale, and a systemic indifference to the craft of cooking. KFC workers, like workers across the Yum! Brand's portfolio, have been consistent participants in the fight for higher wages and better working conditions. The $15 minimum wage movement drew significant participation from fast food workers, including those employed by KFC franchises. Their stories of working full-time while still qualifying for public assistance, of being scheduled erratically to avoid triggering benefits eligibility, of being denied sick leave and working ill because the alternative was losing pay they could not afford to lose, are documented and consistent. For seniors who came of age in an era when even entry-level work was expected to provide some measure of stability and dignity, the conditions inside many fast food kitchens represent a kind of institutional failure that is deeply uncomfortable to sit with. When you buy a bucket of chicken, some portion of that money is funding a labor model that has been widely and credibly condemned as exploitative. The Colonel, by all historical accounts, was a man who paid attention to the people working in his kitchens. He visited locations. He talked to workers. He cared about the craft. The corporation that now carries his name operates at a scale and a distance from its workers that would have been unrecognizable to him. 6. The hidden cost. Behind the bucket. Industrial chicken farming at the scale required to supply a global chain with tens of thousands of locations is one of the most environmentally intensive food systems in the world. So, what actually happens behind a single bucket of chicken? Factory-farmed chickens are raised on enormous quantities of grain feed, much of it grown on land that once supported diverse ecosystems. That grain production demands heavy water use, synthetic fertilizers, and pesticides. But where does all of that impact go? It does not disappear. Factory farms generate massive waste outputs that, when poorly managed, contaminate waterways and affect air quality in surrounding communities. And then, the supply chain continues forward. Because the next question is obvious, how does the product actually reach the restaurant? Through long-distance transport. From farms to processing plants, from processing plants to distribution centers, and finally to individual stores. Each step adds fuel use, emissions, and logistical cost. So what is that cost reflected in? Not the menu price. That is the critical gap, because none of this environmental cost is fully included in the price of a bucket of chicken. It is externalized, meaning it is pushed onto ecosystems, nearby communities, and future generations. And once you see that, another question appears. Why does it stay that way? For seniors who remember when food production felt closer and more visible, when farms and kitchens were not separated by global systems, this invisibility can feel like a kind of disconnect between price and reality. Because the price on the menu only looks cheap if you ignore what is being paid elsewhere. And that leads to the final question. When a corporation has the scale and resources to reduce that impact, what does it say when it does not? 5. A meal loaded with salt. Let's talk about the numbers on the nutritional panel, because for seniors managing blood pressure, heart health, kidney function, or any number of conditions that become more common and more serious with age, those numbers are not abstract. A single piece of KFC original recipe chicken contains over 300 milligrams of sodium. A 3-piece meal with a side and a biscuit can easily deliver over 2,000 milligrams of sodium in a single sitting. The American Heart Association recommends that adults consume no more than 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day, and recommends that older adults and those with health conditions aim for 1,500 milligrams or less. One KFC meal can consume an entire day's healthy sodium budget in a single sitting, with a drink still sitting in front of you. For a 25-year-old with a healthy cardiovascular system, one high-sodium meal is an indulgence to be balanced against other choices. For a 65-year-old managing hypertension, or a 70-year-old with reduced kidney function, or a 75-year-old who has had a cardiac event, that same meal is not an indulgence. It is a medical event dressed up in a red and white bucket. KFC does not hide these numbers. They are on the website if you look for them. But they are also not prominently displayed in the restaurant, and the marketing does not acknowledge them. And the menu design does not make it easy to make informed choices. The nutritional reality of the food is available in fine print, while the advertising is in enormous, colorful lettering. Seniors who are managing their health seriously deserve food service companies that are serious about helping them manage it. That is not a description that fits the current KFC experience. 4. The brand versus the reality. The marketing around KFC is built on heritage, warmth, family, and quality. The Colonel, the secret recipe, finger-licking good, Southern tradition, comfort food done right. Every phrase is designed to trigger memory, home, and trust. Now place that beside the reality. Factory-farmed chicken with unclear antibiotic histories. A supply chain linked to major food safety scandals in Shanghai. Repeated hygiene and inspection issues reported across locations. Rising prices alongside shrinking portions. A corporate parent whose other flagship brands have faced similar criticism. The gap is not subtle, and it is not accidental. The marketing is not meant to reflect reality. It is meant to override attention to it. Heritage branding, especially the use of the Colonel's face and the idea of an original recipe, works by activating nostalgia faster than analysis. It pulls the mind toward memory before it asks questions about the process. So while the customer is thinking about family dinners and comfort, they are not thinking about supply chains, inspection reports, or factory conditions. That is the mechanism. And it is most effective on the people who remember the brand the longest because they carry the deepest emotional connection to it, which creates a final tension. The longer the history with the brand, the harder it becomes to separate the story being sold from the reality underneath it. 3. Why some locations look worse. One pattern appears consistently across fast food chains. Locations in wealthier areas tend to be cleaner, better maintained, and more carefully managed than stores in lower-income communities. The reason is simple. Wealthier customers have more choices, higher expectations, and greater leverage when standards slip. In communities with fewer options, that pressure weakens. Seniors in these neighborhoods are often the most affected because limited mobility and transportation leave them with fewer alternatives. And that creates the real issue. The people with the fewest choices may also be getting the lowest standards. KFC did not create that system, but as one of the world's biggest chains, it continues to operate inside it. 2. Protecting the brand, not fixing the problem. Every major KFC scandal has followed the same pattern. A problem becomes public. The company releases statements, promises retraining, changes a supplier, or shifts responsibility to franchise operators. But the system behind the problem stays the same. That is the difference between reputation management and real reform. One protects the brand. The other fixes the conditions that created the crisis in the first place. Seniors who have watched corporations for decades recognize that pattern immediately. KFC changed the headlines, but not the system that keeps creating them. 1. The chain's doing fried chicken better. Here is the part that matters as much as everything that came before it. The failures of KFC are not inevitable. They are choices. Choices made by a corporation whose priorities place shareholder returns above the people eating the food, the people preparing it, and the communities surrounding its restaurants. We know alternatives exist because other chains make different choices and produce different outcomes. Hattie B's Hot Chicken, a family-owned chain with a small number of locations, demonstrates what operational care looks like. When concerns were raised, they produce detailed digital cook logs showing temperatures and timestamps for every step. That is not luck, that is control. Jollibee, a Filipino chain still relatively unknown to many American consumers, has ranked at the top of national fried chicken comparisons. They emphasize transparency, in-store preparation, and consistent quality, competing successfully against far larger brands. Huey Magoo's operates with a written commitment to no antibiotics ever, no hormones, no steroids, and no preservatives, focusing only on the tenderloin and publishing their sourcing standards clearly. Slim Chickens remains founder-led, without private equity control, emphasizing fresh preparation and operational responsiveness rather than financial extraction. None of these brands are perfect, but together they prove something important. Affordable fried chicken does not require compromised standards, recurring safety concerns, or systemic inconsistency. The Colonel understood that at the beginning. The system that followed learned something different, that nostalgia, pricing, and branding can sustain demand even when quality erodes beneath it. Seniors who grew up on KFC deserve to know what changed behind the bucket they still recognize. Not the branding, the record. Because the Colonel already gave the review, he said it plainly. He said the chicken was ruined. Wallpaper paste, a fried dough ball. That was the message. Everything else was the company continuing to sell a smile over a story that no longer matches what is inside the bucket. And so the question is no longer what KFC used to be. It is what you think you are seeing when you look at it now. Do you think KFC still deserves the reputation it built decades ago? Or is the brand surviving on nostalgia alone? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe. There's another investigation waiting on your screen right now, and what we found there might surprise you even more. Click the next video. I'll see you there.